everyone, and welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Today, Pat and I are going to do a quick end of the Airsoft season recap. We're going to take a quick look at what Airsoft has looked like for us in 2022. The season's not quite over, but we'll get into that in a few minutes. And we'll talk about as well, like our Airsoft goals that we had at the start of the year and sort of how we made out with all of that, looking forward to the end of the year in just, over a month's time, basically. Just take stock of sort of where we are, understanding that if we fell really, really short of some of our goals, it's probably a little too late to sort of pick up the slack. But all that being said, we're going to take a look at that in a second. But first, a couple of different announcements before we get into it. So number one, this podcast, Call Your Hits, has been featured on FeedSpot's top 15 Airsoft podcasts. So we're really, really excited. We're number 3 on that list. You can view the full list at blog.feedspot.com. So thanks to FeedSpot for their support, for finding out about the podcast and putting on their list. That's pretty cool.
Agreed. That's super cool.
Yeah. The second thing that we want to talk about just briefly is an update regarding Bill C-21. So again, if you're not familiar with Bill C-21, it's a Canadian bill that would largely make airsoft illegal, yada, yada. We've talked about it a lot in the past. If this is your first podcast listening to Call Your Hits and first time hearing about C-21, I recommend you go back and listen to it. But for everybody else, you should know what it is. So the status of the bill as it stands is that it's still in the committee stage. They have heard all of their different witnesses, and the government is starting to put together, or when I say the government, I mean the committee is starting to put together their recommendation for amendments to the bill. This is a lengthy process typically, and a lot of the early discussion has featured on the real steel firearm portions of the bill. So there hasn't been a lot of discussion about airsoft as it is.
Kind of understandably, it's a bill that is predominantly about real steel firearms, and so that is the piece that they would, I imagine, have to poke at the most.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not experts about real steel firearms. I'm just listening to it in the hopes that they start talking about airsoft, which they haven't done yet. However, we do have reason to believe that some of the amendments that will be proposed in future have taken into consideration the recommendation, the witness statements, and so on. And of course, anything can happen. That doesn't mean that anything is said and done. However, we are positively anticipating the line reading of the airsoft relevant parts of this bill. So this is actually good news as far as we're concerned. We'll have more information as this continues. The line by line reading continues this week and potentially into next week. And I believe after this week they will take a Christmas break. So again, we may not have any new information on this until the new year. That being said, I just wanted to give you a quick update, and that's that. So let's get on to the meat of the episode, the program today. A bit more of a relaxed episode, but Pat and I wanted to do a little bit of a retrospective as to what 2022 has looked like for airsoft now that the season is coming to a close. Now, you might be listening to this and saying, well, Phil, why does the season stop? Yes, there's winter in Canada, but I thought you guys played in the winter and, all this kind of stuff. And while all that is true, I will say that playing in the winter is certainly a novelty that if you ever get the chance to experience it, I recommend people experience it at least once just to see what that's like. But just like a lot of novelties, the novelty does wear off rather quickly. And especially here in St. John's, Newfoundland, where we're located, the winter here is not like your typical Canadian winter with lots of snow where it's really cold. Here, it's like it gravitates anywhere around 0 degrees Celsius, right? So there's a lot of like freezing and thawing that happens. Sometimes it's a little bit warmer, sometimes it's a little bit colder. There's snow, but it's wet. Like it's not a really pleasant experience to be in. So much like you might try some sort of like hardcore milsim, 48 hours with like no breaks, etc. You might try it once for the novelty and realize that's not really for you. Playing in the winter, I think it is certainly similar. Pat and I have done our fair share, I would say more than our fair share, of winter airsoft. But after, 16 years of playing airsoft, at some point you're like, I enjoy my creature comforts. I will wait for it to thaw out a little bit before I head back to the field.
One of the big things that is kind of unfortunate about airsoft in the winter here specifically is that things get really, really icy. And, I'm a tall guy and the ground is far away.
Yeah. And you also have to find other people who are crazy enough to want to experience that sort of winter play with you. And if it's a bigger game, and we certainly have our fair share of bigger games in like March and April and even February in some cases, and Operation Save Santa one year, which is like in the dead of winter, that's fine. But for random skirmishes and stuff, they just shut down for the winter here.
Yep. And like the field that we play at here, the outdoor field, doesn't do any maintenance during the winter, which means that, frankly, the field conditions become sort of profoundly risky.
Yeah.
And like, I'm not averse to, some risk while playing airsoft. Obviously it's an action sport, so you can beat yourself up, but there are limits. I don't really feel like being the guy on Phil's GoPro breaking his expensive rifle in half because he fell on it.
Yeah. And this isn't to say that you shouldn't play airsoft in the winter. I mean, there's tons of environments where playing airsoft is totally feasible. And I think for us, to Pat's point just now, if it was less icy, it in many cases would probably be a little bit better. Although I'm still not necessarily sure that I would really go out, even if it was less icy, given, how many years I've been playing and so on. But to Pat's point, like, slipping around in the ice and the snow, more prone to breaking things. And I remember when I was getting married and we did my bachelor party, like that was in the month of March, and we went out and we rented a bunch of guns because we didn't want to take the chance of damaging our own more expensive equipment. And so for the rental, it was better to just, spend the extra money and not have to worry about our guns or breaking something as well, right?
For sure. To be clear for the viewers, March is still winter here. We were, I'm 6'2", and we were waist deep snow on me for a chunk of Phil's bachelor party games. We earned our post-game pint. I'll put it that way.
Most definitely, or several pints that night. But anyways, that's beside the point. I think ultimately all this adds up to, for us, it's really not worthwhile to try and get games regularly on the go in the wintertime. So that being said, and as Pat and I were talking about this episode sort of in the lead up to it, we were thinking about when is the latest that we've, ever been able to play an airsoft open game? And I think looking back through old photos, back in like 2017 or 2018, I think, we ended up playing towards the end of December, like right before Christmas, like December 22nd or December 23rd, something like that. Now, there wasn't a big crowd out. I think there might have been a dozen of us. And that's probably the latest. For that to happen again this year, I mean, we could be very fortunate. But right now, the weather has shifted to, it's gray, it's dark early, and most of the time, it's, some sort of drizzle, icy sleet conditions.
It has been raining or snowing, or raining and snowing for the last 4 days. It's just
And the temperature is like going to hover around 0, like it might go to +3, but with the wind chill it's -3. Like all this just makes for just miserable playing conditions. And I know that, especially like in the runners world, people say, "Oh, there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad attitudes." Yeah, well, believe me, the weather sucks. And no amount of positive thinking makes you feel better when you're completely soaking wet and it's like -3 with wind chill. Like it sucks. So for us, I think that's enough exposition around why we don't really play at this time of year. If the weather, like Pat was telling me just before we got on, that the weather for the weekend is just showing like +3 and sunny, in which case we will play. But, barring some fortunate days like that, it's quite likely we'll be shuttered for the winter.
It's worth tossing in there. I'm looking forward to, or hoping to get another game in before the end of the season, because I bought a new gun at the very end of the season, as sensible people do.
Yeah.
And I want to go play around with it.
Well, we're very much in a position in Canada right now because of C21 and uncertainty and stuff. If you're Canadian listening to this right now and there's an airsoft gun that is available for you to buy and you're interested, you should probably buy it, assuming your finances support it and so on, because in 3 months' time you may not have that opportunity, right? Or it might be difficult or what have you. So in this case, Pat was sent me a link to a gun posting, and he's like, "Oh, I wonder if I should buy that." And my reaction, typically, I try to discourage Pat from making poor financial decisions. You know, as his best friend, I sort of have a vested interest in that. But in this case, I was very, perhaps atypically, encouraging him to, yeah, go ahead and pull the proverbial trigger, right? Because
My response to one of our other friends was, "Man, my airsoft conscience isn't working. What do I do?"
yeah. So, I mean, and that's, we'll get into that in a little bit. But so all this to say, we're not going to be playing airsoft at the outdoor. We do have an indoor field. It is run by the same people who run the outdoor field. We've talked about it a little bit in the past, and it's really not our preferred place to play for a variety of different reasons. Well, firstly, my airsoft rifle is not built for indoor play, both in terms of size and in terms of velocity. We could certainly reduce the velocity if we wanted to, but like the size of it is not really ideal for inside play. But the field itself is really not my preferred. And I was saying to Pat, who hasn't been there in many years, it's kind of like if all the rooms in your house, instead of just having like a door and a window, also had random holes like throughout the different walls that you could just be shot at just standing out in the open. And it's dark in there, so sometimes it can be hard to see. It's a very, very different experience. And I'm not going to yuck anybody's yum, but that is most definitely not my yum. Like I really don't enjoy that.
And I think that like one of the practical things is, the space was probably not designed with airsoft in mind. I think it was mostly designed with like laser tag for small kids or medium-sized kids,
like and stuff like that.
Yeah. So it's probably what I'd say a suboptimal place for airsoft play. But I just bought a Scorpion Evo, and it's pretty small. It's pretty pointable. It seems like a good indoor-sized gun, and mostly I just want to put some rounds through it. So if the opportunity comes to avail myself of, then I'll probably go play a game over the next month or two with it, just to, get some trigger time in on it and have a laugh. And like, that'll be worth it just for the sake of getting to play with my new toy.
Yeah. And I mean, I'll come with you, but it's like I was saying, like, it's just not our preferred, but those two things combined mean that for us, really, the next several months really boil down to a period of airsoft contemplation. So we sort of think about where we're at with our kit, with our gear, what needs to be fixed, what needs to be addressed ahead of the next season. What do we need to set up if there are things and changes that we want to make to our kit, etc. And then for me, and I think for many of us, like it's a lot of individual practice. Right. And I mean, when I say a lot, I don't mean like I'm at it constantly, but certainly more than, when you're playing every couple of weeks. In the winter, you go from playing once every couple of weeks to playing not at all for several months. It's important to keep some of your fundamental skills sharp.
Yeah. And you want to make sure, that you sort of try to keep the edge on, as it were.
Yeah. And it's, there's only so much that you can do in terms of, maneuvering on the field and like thinking about the gameplay and stuff like that. But the skills that are truly perishable are your personal skills, and many of those can be maintained through practice, individual practice at home, even like dry fire practice, right? You can do reloads without having to fire a single shot. You can do ready ups without firing a single shot. And really, those are the only skills that I really consider that are very, very important. I mean, you can do mobility skills, shoulder transitions. You can do like dropping to a knee, dropping to prone, like all this kind of stuff, different ports. Like you can do like a high ready, a low ready, a high port, or whatever. And you can practice all of that and all this individual manipulation. But for me, the bread and butter, as we've talked about many times in the past, is the ready up drill, right? If you don't do anything but ready up drills, you're still maintaining that sort of fundamental snap shooting skill that is essential to being effective on the field. Because like we said, if you're coming around a corner and it takes you, a couple seconds to bring your rifle up and acquire a sight picture and then pull the trigger, well, the guy who can do that in just a fraction of a second is going to get you every single time, right? And that's absolutely a skill you can train by just doing ready ups at your light switch, right, in your room. Right?
Yeah, kind of unsurprisingly, I've been doing a lot of ready ups with the Scorpion. That's more a matter of like wanting to play with it again, if I'm being completely honest. But it means that I'm trying to get practiced in with using a new form factor of rifle, right? Like
Yeah, legit.
the mag release is not where the mag release on an M4 is, and almost everything else I use is an M4.
Yeah.
You know, like the 249, I guess, sort of counts, but if you're taking the mag out of the 249 during a game, something has gone terribly wrong.
Yeah, you've got bigger problems. Yeah.
Or you're Phil on an average day.
Yes. Well, let's move on, shall we? But you're right, and I mean, ultimately, it doesn't really matter what gets you doing those ready ups, like as long as you're doing them. And I think this is a neat tie-in into what our goals were in terms of airsoft for this year, because I had said back in January of this year, so January 2022. I had talked about sort of what my airsoft goals for the year were, and one of those was to do 25 ready ups every single week. And except for a period of time, like right at the start of January, when we moved into the new house and everything was in flux for a while, I sort of dropped the ball on it, but I picked it back up. And I did great with that until we started playing airsoft. And when we started playing airsoft for the season, I found that I fell off of doing my ready ups at home every single week. And when you think about it, I mean, my goal was to do 25 ready ups per week. Well, when I was playing, I was definitely doing 25 ready ups.
That just happened to be people on the other end of it.
Well, yeah, exactly. I, probably did like hundreds and hundreds of ready ups when we were playing. But that really wasn't the intent, right? The intent was for me to have that practice and built in that consistency, right? Of like, you do it every week, you do it every week. And, I sort of fell off the wagon because it really wasn't serving my purpose, right? And that's not to say that you can't, reevaluate your goals. But as I look back on it now, and as I look forward to several months now of not playing airsoft, I find myself coming back to that, like, oh no, I need to go back to doing ready ups. I need to go back to doing, my reloads and all this kind of stuff to keep those skills sharp, as you were saying.
Yeah, I mean, it's to me sort of sensible that like practice is more necessary for us when we know we're not going to be playing for protracted periods. Because at least in some senses, playing is practice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is not to say that it probably wouldn't have been a good idea to keep doing them. I think I've been okay on the ready ups. There have definitely been weeks where I haven't done any, especially this fall getting back to work. But over the summer, I definitely did a decent number of them every week.
But that was my goal. That wasn't your goal.
Oh yeah, I know. Just sort of thinking about like how I did with it in retrospect, anyway.
Yeah. Well, and in that context, you didn't have a goal, so everything was gravy for you, right?
No, true.
But I think you raised absolutely. I think you raised a good point, though. Your goals have to be reflective of what is useful for you. Like, what you just can't. As far as I'm concerned, it shouldn't just be like, I'm doing this to do it. Like, it has to be pointing you towards something bigger than the goal in and of itself.
Yeah, it's good to have a plan, as it were, right?
Yeah.
Because you can just say, oh, like I've set this goal, but if you don't have any purpose behind it or any intent behind it, I'm not sure that it's useful in the same way.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think one of the other goals that I had discussed too was I wanted to play at least 12 times, right? Basically once a month, essentially. And actually, before we started recording this episode, I actually thought that I had not succeeded at that goal. I was like, oh wow, I've played way less this year than I anticipated, or than I wanted to. And so in order to find the answer to the question of how many times did I play, I just went back and I looked at my footage, because I organize all my footage by dates. And I found that I have played, so far in 2022, I have played 11 times. So I haven't succeeded at my goal, but also the year is not over. So it's quite possible that I'll sneak in one extra game, or I'll just go to the indoor and call it 12, and that'll be that.
My response to that was, oh, another reason to play this weekend if we can.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, like, hey, anything that's an extra benefit there is solid, right? Like, and like Phil said, it's kind of a problem here this time of year with getting out into the field to play games, partly because it's like, well, our weather currently is terrible, but also like it's dark when you get out of bed, it's dark when you get home from stuff. Like it's hard to find motivation. And like, I'm not a big seasonal depression guy, but it's definitely like, ugh, right now.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I feel like for most of our team, it's sort of like we're getting on towards cozy season. It's a little harder to motivate people. But on the upside, if Phil and I are both like, yeah, let's go, then more of our guys are likely to join us, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So here's hoping.
I know for you, you had a more broad goal, I think, and probably less specific, but certainly still valuable, of just playing more than you did previous years. And I can say without a shadow of a doubt, like that's a big success for you, right?
Yeah, man, that was, I think, outstanding in terms of my success level. I don't think I hit 11 games. Like I think there are a couple you played, but I'm definitely around like 9. And relative to the 2 that I made the previous year, like that's a huge improvement.
Absolutely.
I think part of it's this podcast honestly motivates me to go play. Part of it's sort of new toys, and a large chunk is just going, this is something I really enjoy doing and it's really fun. And it's very easy for me to go, I don't want to get out of bed at like 8 a.m. on a Saturday, especially during the school year when I am teaching at 8 a.m. most work days. And I'm just not a morning person. So I've definitely made a concerted effort, especially like once school started back up, to go more often than not. And I've been really happy with it. I've had a ton of fun. So yeah, I think that particular goal was just aces for me. Like I played more. I didn't set a specific number of games I wanted to meet. But I got in regular play and I had a blast. And it was a very positive season for me. Very few frustrating games, very few like places where I was like, about anything. Partly because of my second goal.
Yeah. And just to come back to this goal, I think one of the things that was very noticeable for me this year is the number of times that we were at the field and it's like 10 o'clock and we're just getting the game started. And like John said to me, where's Pat? I thought Pat was coming. And I was like, I guess he's not coming today. And then you'd show up anyway. Like you'd be late, but you showed up, right? As opposed to many times in the past where I think you, to your point just now, weren't able to find that motivation to really get out of bed for whatever reason, right? Health wise or whatever. I'm not saying it's not legit, but like where in the past maybe you would have said to yourself, you know what, forget it. This time you're like, okay, no, I'm gonna try and get out there. And then, like you said, more times than not, he ended up having at least an okay time. There's a couple of times I remember us being frustrated, but
yeah, but I mean, like that happens with everything.
Yes, especially when you have like an LNG that won't feed, and you can't figure out what. Yeah, there it is. You guys can't see it, but Pat rolled his eyes big time.
Correct. Figured that problem out after the fact, naturally. But I think one of the big takeaways for me there is that I did a better job of going, well, if I have to choose between being 30 minutes late or not going, I'm going to go. Mm-hmm. Right. And definitely, like last year, I would have made the other choice, just because I was less committed to doing it. It was sort of like, I'll go whenever I feel like it. And this year I did a lot more of like making sure that I left stuff on Friday night at like a quasi reasonable time so that I actually would be able to drag myself out of bed on Saturday morning and stuff like that. Yeah. But also, just a more concerted effort to go, I'm awake, let's go, even if it was going to be 15 minutes late or half an hour late.
And I think that you touched on it, and I think you glossed over it probably a bit more than you should have. But having new toys to try out is such a big motivator, right? Definitely. When you have things that you have put, I was going to say, well, sweat and tears for sure, perhaps blood also, into building, and fine tuning. Yeah, exactly. Like you really want to get out there and try, see how they do on the field, etc. Especially when it's something that, for our money, especially at our field, for ourselves, we haven't seen a whole lot. Like we haven't seen a whole lot of LMGs being used very frequently. Every now and again. And HPA is still, a relative newcomer to the scene here. We still see vastly more AEGs than we see HPA. So yeah, there's a lot of reason for you to try those things out, right? And that goes for anyone who's listening. Like if you're looking for a way to motivate yourself to play airsoft, buy a new gun. right? This is your bad airsoft conscience talking.
It definitely works. It has some drawbacks for the wallet potentially, but like it's a good way to motivate yourself.
I think the other thing that we sort of cut off, but we can come back to now, is your second goal, which was around working on fewer guns. Because I know that was a big stressor for you in the past.
Yeah, and I think that it definitely wasn't a thing that I would say was like causing me not to go play airsoft, but it was a thing that, if I'm being honest, like spending 6 or 7 hours on someone's gun was definitely a thing that was often happening and filling up my time to dedicate to airsoft, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah.
But also just there's a point, I think, where dealing with every single broken gun in the community all the time just gets really, really tiresome. And like I've said this before, and I'm really stand by it. Like, the motivation for teching for me has always been, a mixture of wanting to get my gun and like Phil's gun and a couple of our teammates' guns like just so, right? Like, I want this to work really, really well. And then my motivation to work on other people's gear was to pay for mine.
Yeah.
And when, I was working, a couple of jobs to make ends meet and didn't have a whole lot of money, it was a lot easier to offer me $100 and get me to sit down for 7 hours and tinker with your gun. At this point, not that I don't like the $100, but I genuinely don't have a ton of time to devote to any given thing that I wanted to do, partly because I have too many hobbies, I'm aware. But even sort of accounting for the fact that I have too many hobbies, it just comes down to, if I don't want to do it, there's a substantially higher amount of money you're going to need to offer me to build your gun. Right. At the moment, I have one gun for the winter season sort of set aside because one of our teammates is coming back to playing and he wants it, tuned up and made just so. That's great. That's not a problem. I'm delighted to do that, really. And I'm going to take another crack at John's bloody FAL because it just will not work right. But aside from those two and like general systems maintenance on our collective gear, and I really mean Phil's and mine, then, I don't have a whole lot of motivation to go find other guns to tinker with at the moment. Part of the appeal, I think, of the HPA stuff for me is that it's something different to play with. Like, I have a pretty good idea of how AEGs work. So that probably helps. It also probably helped motivate me to come out and play more honestly, because the different way in which HPA stuff works has been really fun to mess around with and learn about. And as with, I think, most things, like, I will save the details of this for another episode, but like, I'm looking into different upgrades and different setups for running my HPA setup for next season already. And that's one of the cool things about the end of season and the downtime for us is like, okay, so what do we want to try to get squared away for next season? For me, for Phil, for our team, this is our, one of our big, like, okay, let's break out all the kit, toss it on, a table or on the floor or wherever, and have a look at all of our airsoft gun related, like, specific gear. What can we do with this? What did we like about this season's setup? What did we not like? What did we use? What did we not use? And so there'll definitely be a number of, after action / cosplay hours.
But I mean, when you think about it, it's logical. Like, you have, if you're anything like us, and I mean, many of you listeners are in the same sort of positions that we're in terms of having, grown up responsibilities, your job, your house, your relationship, your kids, your whatever. And as a consequence of that, the amount of hours you have to dedicate to airsoft every week is limited, right? And as Pat was saying, like, if you've got 10 hours a week to give to airsoft and you're spending 7 of them gun teching, that doesn't leave a whole lot of your week available. And so for us as well, like, the winter months represent a portion of time where we get sort of a surplus in that time back, right? Because now we get back an extra 4 hours where we're not heading to the field, plus the time to get there, the commute back, plus all the gear prep time, etc. So suddenly we have an extra, let's say 6 to 8 hours in our week that we can rededicate to airsoft to other things, right? Not to mention the money that we save from playing, although we are going to reinvest it into airsoft kit and then some probably. But like if it costs us $25 a week to play airsoft for field fees, and you put BBs on top of that, well then every month you're saving 50-60 bucks. And then by the end of summer, or by the end of winter, I should say, you've saved a couple $100s that you can then reinvest to airsoft in different ways, right? So it is a period of, I guess, boon in some way to airsoft for us to have this downtime. And let's be honest, when like April rolls around, we're really jonesing for a game. So we come to the field with a higher level of motivation, right?
Yeah, definitely. Spring is like, we're knocking the rust off, so it's probably some of our worst play, but it's also some of our most enthusiastic. Mm-hmm. There's no, I don't know if I want to get up on Saturday morning and play ourselves. Like, holy shit, I can get up and play airsoft. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is definitely a solid thing. The piece I kind of want to pop back to is like, it is a good time to, take your kit apart and again, think about what you did with it, what you liked, what you didn't, wash the stuff that needs to get washed that you have probably not gotten around to washing. Hose the paintball residue off your Cordura.
Yeah, really.
If you play, as we do, at a field that has paintball games as well. And like, I know for sure, if I'm looking at my stuff, like, I don't know if I need to go through I have a crate of kit I didn't use this year, and I might go through that and sell some of it. I certainly need to go see what's in there and see if I need any of it. But, I'm looking at, an optic for the Scorpion. I'm looking at HPA stuff. I have sort of a little shopping cart that I want to purchase over the next 6 months. That probably contains too many things involving the words HPA system, if I'm being honest, but hey, that's part of the fun of window shopping, right? Mm. The soft kit piece is also really useful though, like I definitely need to have a look at my chest rig. One of the things I'm going to be playing with over the next couple of months is, okay, so I have a Scorpion and it does not run M4 mags. So like I'm already practicing reloads because it's not a system I'm used to reloading, and it has very different, furniture than an M4. But I also need to figure out how I'm going to store those, because I probably don't want to buy a new rig or take the M4 pouches off my rig, meaning I need to figure out how to do it sort of as a hybrid kit. The good news is that my, my collapsing elastic mags or mag pouches rather, for the M4 will absolutely just take those and it'll be fine. The tacos that I have might work. We'll see. So, there's definitely some tinkering there. I didn't really run my sidearm at any point this year. I don't think I'm going to take it and like sell it because they're way too much fun. But there's definitely a sort of like, I need to think about figuring out how I want to run that better so that it actually gets like used when I'm playing games a little, or at least like carried and loaded. And that's not a huge failure, but it's definitely a thing to address. I would love to find a new source of grenade parts, or maybe some kind of grenade that isn't the ones I've been using. Because
that's something I've been thinking about too. Like my tornadoes are seeing, it's probably their last days. Like they're getting to a point now where like parts are leaking, and like there's only so much silicone oil that will fix this problem.
Yeah. And rebuild kits are in scarce supply.
Well, they're essentially non-existent. I have so many parts for tornadoes, and like it's at a point where the plastic shuttles, like the plastic itself is just worn down and it's not holding, like it's not a great situation. So I would say if I get another season out of all my tornadoes, I'd be very, very surprised. And so like there are other alternatives out there, but I have yet, like the ASG Storm I think is one There's a couple of different ones, and then there's like those cheap plastic ones that like just basically have a spring inside and they shoot whatever's inside them. Like it could be BBs.
Yeah, I haven't been super impressed with those.
No, and you're not supposed to like throw, like, I mean, you know me, like I throw a grenade, I throw a grenade, right? But if you do that with those, you could just break them, right? Which is not, I mean, that's not how I roll, right? Like that's just straight up.
On the upside, at least in terms of like the silly spring-loaded ones, and I mean, no harshing on them, I guess, but like I haven't found them to be particularly effective outdoors. You know, if you throw it and it explodes against a rock, it's probably actually going to shoot the BBs further than with the spring. Not perhaps working as intended, but like there it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, like my tornado is also in a pretty spotty place, and like in the defense of all of the tornadoes we have on tap, that are all in sort of, you know, various states of disrepair, you know, there's a point where it's like, well, this piece of plastic is 8 years old and we have been filling it with propane and throwing it at stuff. So
Yeah.
I kind of don't feel too badly about the state of them, other than obviously we can't replace them with brand new ones. I think if we were in a situation where that was feasible, we probably still would. But, you know, obviously the situation with airsoft innovations is perhaps not ideal for replacement parts.
Yeah, in that they no longer exist,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Right. So,
And to be honest, like even if they did exist, they do not manufacture that particular model anymore. I distinctly remember, I may have even talked about it on the podcast, like when I had, I was looking for, I can't remember what part, and it was grenade pins. It was tornado grenade pins. And I was like, they're no longer listed on the website, but I'm going to send them an email. And they were like, yeah, sure, we still have some in the warehouse. And I bought like 5 and they sent them to me. And a couple of years later, I went back and I sent them an email and I was like, hey, I want to buy more. And they're like, okay, fine. And then a couple of years after that, I went back and they're like, okay, Phil, these are the last ones. We don't have any more. Right? So
Stop losing
do
them.
not ask anymore. Like this is whatever we have, you can have them. We have like 6. You can have those 6, but that's it. We got nothing left. And I was like, cool, man.
And that's that's the reality of that situation, right? I still maintain those are a really useful asset when we're playing.
Agree.
And there were games this season where I had none because mine was like, I tried to load it before the game and it was like, this is definitely not going to work when I throw it. So I'll just leave it in the box. So if we can figure out a good solution to that, that'd be, you know, I think worth our while, over the winter. You know, and it's just getting to sit down and have conversations like this and honestly record episodes about it as we think it through is not at all a bad thing for our process.
Definitely.
And, you know, I think I can say with a reasonable amount of hope that you guys don't mind hearing our process as we try to figure stuff out, because you're still here listening to us. And if you did, you'd probably be gone.
Well, and I think, you know, our process is not unique. Like, I think many people, especially like airsofters who are either local to us or airsofters who live in Canada or places where there's similar climate, like you may be going through exactly the same process. You may decide that you want to hang up airsoft for a couple of months over the holiday seasons, etc. Like, who knows, right? So I would hope that some people who are listening to this go, oh, actually, you know, this is applicable to me, or I'm glad I'm not the only one who does it. But
oh yeah, definitely. I mean, we've got players, you know, on the Discord in Europe who are definitely looking at similar, you know, climate conditions to some extent. You know, and I know some of them play through the winter, but others definitely don't.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I think I'm looking forward to in terms of my kit this year, what's really interesting is for the last for the last month or maybe month and a half, my airsoft rifle has not been performing to the standard that I wanted to. It's shooting like what was it saying the other day? 1.2 joules?
1.2, 1.3 somewhere, yeah.
Yeah, and it should be shooting like close on 1.4, 1.5. And normally that drives me crazy, but we've been having so much fun swapping different guns out, rocking with the LMG, rocking my gun, Pat's HPA, just farting around and trying a bunch of different stuff. I really haven't minded. Like, it's just been where in the past that really would have gotten under my skin. I've been having so much fun rolling with my good buddy Pat, like doing all this fun stuff that everything else sort of evaporates. And you know what? 1.2 joules is still fine and I can still do work because, well, I sort of understand the limitations of my airsoft gun. That being said, it's a long boy and I am not getting long boy performance out of it. So,
and that's the thing to address.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, you know, now is the perfect time for us because over the last couple of weeks, Pat and I have said multiple times, hey, we should get that fixed. It's like, yeah, and then it doesn't happen. Well, why doesn't it happen? Well, because we're really busy and there's other stuff that's happening and it gets in the way. But now we all have collectively this extra time in our week that we can say, okay, no, hang on, let's really put aside some time.
Yeah,
And
the winter hibernation includes
you know
more
what I
time
mean?
to work on airsoft guns, in the shop, right? Like shop time becomes a lot more available when all the things you would normally do outdoors are like, no.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, okay, well, we're not going to the airsoft field. Well, in that same time slot, I'm coming over, or you can come over here and we'll troubleshoot, we'll work on stuff, we'll hang out for a bit, right? So you get a bit more flexibility. And for me, I think that's really what I want to have squared away. And honestly, I have been considering whether or not I should get some sort of HPA setup. Either an HPA setup for myself or my own HPA tank, my own HPA reg, my own HPA line, so that I can just bum whatever Pat's not using.
And, one of the cool things there is I've been looking at, adjusting the regulator and the tank I'm using. And I think actually, based on where I am currently with my pile of research on this, that just adjusting the regulator might actually do all the things I want. But a tank with a really basic regulator is not super expensive. And suddenly I have 2 HPA guns. Right?
Can only use one at a time.
Yeah, exactly. Like, the Scorpion's pretty small. I could sort of I don't know, graft it to as an underbarrel attachment.
I mean, you could use it as a sidearm. I definitely couldn't.
I mean, that's true. Just pop the stock off and go. But, silly ideas notwithstanding, yeah, I can only use one of those at the same time. And so having the 2 of those on deck is pretty cool as an idea. I do still plan on HPAing the 249. I was looking at our go-to spot to purchase, and they have a drop-in jack kit for one in stock, and that was they didn't have a Black Friday sale, and it's a good thing.
Yeah, really. Eh?
It's like that is a harder will save than I really want to be making. But that hasn't happened yet, but the odds that it'll happen at some point between now and June are pretty high, I think. So yeah, Phil's in a situation where if he does buy a HPA bottle, I've got a second line already because I bought a longer one to replace the one I originally picked up because I have giant noodly arms. That is less of an issue for reasonable sized humans. So it's pretty easy to get Phil rocking a HPA gun. And that's not to say that I don't intend to get his working spot on.
Oh yeah,
because
totally,
I do.
totally.
But
It's just more options, right? Again, it's looking at what do you want to do next year? What does that season look like for you right now? What are you interested in doing, and so on. And one of the things I did really learn this year in using the AK and the Chi-Com and stuff like that is that a lot of the things that I sort of took for granted in terms of, oh, well, I'm only effective if I use an M4. I'm only effective if I use none of that is really true, right? If you give me a reasonably performing gun, I will perform to the same relative standard as I do with anything else. And so that makes me a little bit less hesitant to sort of jump in and say, okay, I'm going to try this, I'm going to try that, right?
And, one of the benefits to using the stuff, at least that I've been rocking, the LMG has been spotty, but it's also performing so much better than any non-HPA LMG we've ever used that I'm still pretty happy. I think we still had fun running it.
Oh yeah.
And it's gonna sound silly, but it's big and it's loud and it shoots many BBs that way. So there's some enjoyment to be had using that. Even so, my IR is pretty spot on.
Yeah.
And I have a couple of things I want to tinker with that if I can afford them over the winter as well. Chaz recommended we try the 6.01 barrels, and I really do want to give that a shot.
Yeah, same.
Just to see what happens. What can I do with this? The Scorpion is a different HPA engine. It's a Wolverine Inferno. So getting to know that and figuring out how it's different from the Polar Star ones will be pretty cool. And, you can't give me a gun for more than 15 minutes before I take it apart. And I'm like, what can I put in here?
Yeah.
So, like, one of the upsides, I guess, to hot swapping and to be playing with my toys is that usually they're all working pretty well. So you're getting to play with something that functions reasonably nicely as well. And that's true of most of our team's gear. So, if you're swapping in and out with stuff, it works out well for you, I think. And I think that is
Definitely.
another of those reasons that playing with a team is really, really good because you get to share toys. I mean, the last game we played, a couple of the guys used the Garand because it was just like, all right, bring everything. Fair enough. And it's like, wow, for a stock gun, this is surprisingly good. Like, the trigger pull is really long, but it shoots way better than we expected. Just
Didn't you end up putting the old Trigger Master MOSFET in that thing?
it's got a gate in it because that was easier to wire in.
Oh, gotcha.
And like, part of the reason the trigger is long is just it's still running a stock motor. Like, it doesn't have a bunch of the fancier components that we're used to in it. The other big piece is just the way the trigger on its design means it's got a long pull.
Yeah.
But it's super fun to shoot. It is just a laugh to bring to games. I have no intention of upgrading it beyond where it currently is. It's not what it's for. But that's a laugh. I will admit, like, there probably isn't a world where I buy another gun in HPA this year, unless something stupid falls into my lap in terms of like, oh, this is way cheaper than it should be. My my finances will only allow so much stupidity.
Yeah.
But I also feel like an SMG, a long range rifle, and an LMG is probably pretty adequate.
You got all your bases covered.
You know,
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
One of the guys has a bolt action HPA setup that I am pretty impressed with. Actually, two of the guys have them. They're different guns, but like, I'm like, ooh, those are pretty badass. But I'm also not in a position where like building that seems like a thing I'm gonna do.
Yeah, and that in particular never seemed like your style, right? Like, never seemed like something that really appealed to you.
Yeah, I think it'd be fun, and like, if he's down with it, we might try this for like a month of next season. I think it'd be cool to bomb Kosh's HPA bolt action, put my optic on it, put like just a standard rifle sling on it so that it can be stowed really easily, and then carry it with the Scorpion.
It'd be interesting, yeah.
Because like, then I have both options, and like, the mobility is pretty available and stuff, and like, that might be doable in a way that's interesting and or fun. And so I kind of want to try it and goof around with it. But it's not really my jam. Like, I'm not a it's weird, like, I'm a big dude, but I'm not a sit in one place and just like try to hide and pop single rounds out kind of guy. It's
Yeah.
not my jam. So
It's interesting. It's interesting though what you talk about, because what you just talked about, because it sort of is one of the other things we sort of hinted at that is a benefit of this down period, which is thinking about sort of what's in store for you next year or what you want to try. And a lot of that can be informed by looking back on your year and saying like, well, okay, what did we accomplish? What did we do? What were the games like, etc. I think I was in a previous episode, or certainly on the podcast, on the Discord, I should say, I was largely irreverent about how we basically just played the same games every time we went out. Right, every single day when we played at Frontline, it was always like, all right, village deathmatch. Okay, swap sides. Okay, come back. We'll do a road game. All right, after the road game, we're gonna go. What do we do? Let's do I don't know, assimilation. Okay, after that's done, we're gonna do a couple of team deathmatch in the village. Okay, now we're gonna do D-Day, right? And it was basically just that over and over and over, right? And so as you look back on your year, you can say, well, what would we do differently? Right? What would I have done differently, and how is that going to be different next year? And I think you being like, hey, I want to try like a sniper rifle setup, but I want to put that on my back along with the Evo, which you now have, is some of the things. And I would encourage everyone to think about that for themselves, right? In terms of their own kit, their own practice, everything that they did, right?
Well, like, one of the things that I found this year, I like, I played a little bit less than you did. But one of the things I found kept play fresh for me was that it was like, okay, so we're doing, we're going to do 2 road games every Saturday. All right, well, road game number 1, I'm going to use the M27. All right, road game number 2, hey, Phil, take the M27. I'm going to use the 249. Right? And just like, okay, so how does this gun affect my playstyle? How does this gun plus my playstyle work in this game with these players? What can we make work? What can we make happen that we couldn't do with the other gun is definitely a fun way of doing things. And like one of the reasons I'm hyped to HBA the LMG is that this year, definitely it wasn't working as well as it could be, right? Like it just was not doing everything I wanted to do. And like, I know that. I'm not salty about it. Like it's like, oh yeah, whatever. But I can make that gun perform a lot better. And doing that should result in both a pretty fun alternate way of playing and also a pretty effective one once I get things squared away. So like that's really appealing.
For me, I really was looking more at the gameplay, and I think I talked about this in a previous podcast. Like, I absolutely will be rerunning one of the ops that we ran back in like 2013, 2014, the Operation Last Refuge.
Yep.
And that's going to be closer to, it's going to be milsim adjacent with like LARP elements and all this kind of stuff, and provide people an experience that here, at least most of them have never experienced in terms of airsoft play. And it's something that I haven't done really in many years. Like if you think about, before the Pando, right? Like when was the last op we did pre-Pando? It would have been maybe 2018, 2017.
Yeah, 2017 maybe? Probably. I don't think we did one in that year. So like, yeah, I mean,
So it's been a while since I've actually organized that kind of game, and
that's something that
I'm looking forward to it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's something you find fun. I find fun. So wicked, right? Like it's something different to do, and hopefully, one of the cool things about running sort of complex game mode stuff with people is that it results in people going, well, I guess we'll try something different, right? And usually it results in people going, hey, we should implement some of that stuff into our regular week by week stuff to frankly provide variety to shake it up. So like it's good for us because we get to have fun. It's good for us because we get to do something that like causes the community to go like, yeah, have more fun. But it's also good for us because it means that we get a fresher game experience, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, that's something I'm really looking forward to. And I think once the community sort of gets their eyes opened a little bit to some of the other things that are potential, to your point, like I could absolutely see them on like a random Saturday be like, hey, what was that thing that we did in the village? Could we do something like that right now in the next 20 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever, right? So
yeah, and a lot of the pieces of that break down pretty well, right? So it's one of those things where, yeah, the answer is going to be, yeah, we can do that. Right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, lots of things we have like optimistic plans for in terms of getting prepped and squared away over the winter. Lots of stuff to try building and tinkering with, bits and pieces of our kit to tweak, and also like planning for next season. Maybe this will be fun. Be finally the winter where I talk to Chris and we get that sort of like rebuild or resettable prop bomb with a keypad built.
Yeah, maybe so.
Like maybe we can do some of that stuff as well, right? Like it's definitely a hobby where like creativity is a huge asset, and where the cool stuff you can do is absolutely broad and interesting. So I tend to look forward to the winter as like, okay, so we've got more downtime, but that's not I'm not going to do anything for airsoft time. That is, I'm going to play with my airsoft toys and try to figure out what I want to do with them for next season, and tack on new bits and bobs.
Yeah, absolutely. And like this, and to be clear, like this is not the last episode of the season. Like we're gonna have more Call Your Hates episodes, throughout the season.
Absolutely, I don't mean to suggest otherwise.
No, not at all. But I think this is the point of the year where sort of we start to hit that retrospective, where we start looking at, things start slowing down because it's, the holiday season is coming up and all this kind of stuff. But rest assured, like we're not slowing down in terms of the podcast. We may take a break for Christmas, but like the whole idea is just we want to have this conversation now. So if you're in the same situation that we are in or similar to ours, you can start giving some consideration to how you're going to spend the next little while.
And it gives you guys sort of an idea of where our heads are at the moment in terms of the hobby.
And that being said, like we're gonna have a new episode for you next week. But I mean, until then, that's all we really have for you this week. Thank you so much for listening. If you wanted to keep the conversation going, the Discord link is in the description below. We'd love to have you as a member of our community. But until that time, that's all we got for you, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks for tuning in, guys. Have a good week.